thank you to the MCA for hosting this exhibit, for having the idea for this exhibit. They contacted me, I don't know, maybe a year ago, and said they were doing a tactile art show. And I said, that sounds great. Let me know when it opens, I'll come. And they said, well, actually we had another idea. How would you like to curate it? And I said, it's not that I wouldn't like it, but I'm a blind person. And I know, because I'm the daughter of two visual artists, I know that visual artists usually submit images of their work for a juried exhibition. And what am I going to do with that? So we devised a system, and this I'm actually quite proud of, that in addition to submitting images that all the artists did, they had to include a descriptive text where they said in detail what the piece looked like. But also they had to, in some ways, talk about what it would be like to touch it. Those texts were really, really interesting to read, and in fact they made the basis of my judgments. So I read these descriptions, and when something said, oh boy, I really want to get my hands on that, that was something that I knew would be in the show. I'm very excited by the size of the show. There are 53 pieces by, I don't remember exactly how many artists, because some artists have more than one piece in the show. But it's a really, really extensive exhibit. And I don't want to take up too much time on the panel, but I just wanted to say a few things about the show in general, but also about the experience of tactile art, because I think it's such a rare experience for anybody to get to touch art, that it's useful to sort of think about how to do it and what one gets out of it. The first thing that I'll say is when I've been describing this project to people, what I've been saying is I don't think of this as an exhibit for blind people, but I think of it as an exhibit that does not exclude blind people. Because I think typically art museums and art galleries are highly visual places. And it is very, very rare that people in those spaces think about blind and visually impaired people and how they might be accessing the art. So in that formula that I'm making, this is work to be touched by blind people, but it's also work to be touched by sighted people who also have not had the experience of touching art. So I just wanted to give a few pointers about maybe some good ways to do that. The first pointer is take your time. Anybody who works in museums will tell you that the average time that people spend before a work of art is some ridiculously small number of seconds, right? People look and move on. Look, move on. With tactile art, you can't do that. You have to stop, you have to explore, you have to try different ways of touching. Some of the ways of touching you might want to try is, in some instances, you may want to touch with your fingertips in a very delicate way because somehow the material feels like it's delicate and requires that kind of respect. Other pieces may feel more solid, may inspire you to grasp with your whole hand, maybe even putting some muscle behind it in your arms. Some of the pieces in the show invite manipulation and handling. There are moving parts that you can move around and see what develops. You can dig your fingers into some of those textile pieces, feel what's underneath, feel how the thing is put together. Also, a lot of this work is multisensory. Some of these pieces you touch it and it makes a sound. You touch it in a different way, it makes another sound. some of these materials, when you've handled it for a while, leave a pleasing scent on your fingertips. So I invite you and encourage you, if you didn't have the time to do it tonight, come back another occasion and spend time with this work, because you'll really get rewards from doing that. I want to open things up to the panelists. We've already had a discussion here about what we were going to discuss, but so we'll get to a lot of different topics that we're interested in here. And I just wanted to ask people, maybe as a point of reflection to start, is I'd like to know, because we have represented here an artist. Maryan has a piece in the show. Is it on this floor? Yeah, we're on the second floor. Yeah. Well, you can find it. Go look for it. Sarah is also an artist, but an art educator. And Ronit is a art educator and actually a museum professional. And so I'm just wondering if people want to reflect briefly on what your experience of visiting the exhibit, seeing all the other works, but also seeing the access features that are included in this exhibit. What are you going to bring back to your artistic practice, your educational practice from this exhibit to your communities? So, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. I think that the question about what this particular exhibit brings that other art exhibits don't is an amazing question, and it's really what the heart of this whole exhibit is about, is accessibility. So the first thing I noticed when I came in, even before I saw my art piece, which is the Integrated Abilities dance piece on this floor, the first thing I noticed is that they had text that's enlarged. They have you can actually listen, an auditory tour, and they have a map, an accessibility map. So that's on the first floor. And then each of the pieces have their own texture, they have their own designs. They're also placed in an area that you can actually touch it and feel it. Normally when I go to an art gallery, I have to kind of stand at a distance and I'm told don't touch it. You know, they have the tape in front of it. And so this is just really interesting to both have my artwork as part of this and to see other people's artwork. Can I also talk about my piece a little bit? The Integrated Abilities dance. Okay. So I teach Integrated Abilities dance, and I wanted the piece to really represent the motion and movement that you have two dancers. So you have a person who's in a wheelchair and a male dancer who's a partner, and he's hanging onto the wheelchair. So when I made it, I wanted, like, how do I represent motion? Normally when you see a painting, you just have to look at the painting. But I wanted people to be able to feel it, so I decided to do it as a sculpture. And it's made of hot glue, in case you're wondering. So it's probably a little different material than one is used to. And when the partner is down, he's actually in ponytail, kind of doing an arabesque. And so he's holding the wheelchair user in the air. And then when you turn the wheel of the wheelchair, then he's above the wheelchair. So it's the idea behind it is to make it accessible and also inclusive.
Thank you. So I was thinking in this exhibition very much about the multi-sensory experience. As I work in a museum where there are a lot of things you can't touch, it made me think about how we can make those pieces come alive for people who are not able to see them. And also, we work with a wide variety of disabilities, but for all people to create that multisensory experience. And we do provide multisensory tours already, but I was also thinking about how we can promote that more in terms of the thought about smell, providing some further sense for people to smell when they're with an art object. Sound is another one. A lot of artworks, when you think about them, might have a sound associated with them, whether you're looking at Monet's garden, whether you would play a piece of music related to gardens. And it also made me realize how underdeveloped, certainly for myself, my other sensory skills are, how reliant I am on vision. And this exhibition has given me time to pause and think about using other of my senses, and I really appreciate that, and has made me think about when we do touch tours at the museum, about how one can take time over those and really explore closely the pieces at the MFA that are available to touch. So I'm very grateful for this exhibition to make me think about those things.
Hello, well, Georgina, just to kind of respond to that question of my initial experience walking into this space this evening and what I can bring back to my community, which I think is so important to keeping my own personal eyes and ears open at all times. But, this exhibit really does kind of address the whole person, through that interactive experience and kind of that human emotion and the intimacy that we are finally allowed to have in this kind of setting. And I think that is just, tonight while just like standing wherever I was standing in this space, even outside, it almost was like a symphony, like an orchestra, and then, looking around and seeing this engagement, it was like a dance, that was not choreographed, but really organic and just a really natural, beautiful experience. And I just feel so honored to be a witness to everything this evening, from the materials that were provided for accessibility to this beautiful array of attendees. And the other thing too is that the caliber of this work I found was really profound and really well done. And then getting this opportunity to speak with a few of the artists here this evening, Rosalind and Michael, and here these are just not just, but they're artists and they're working and they are thinking about materials and the way in which they are experiencing them, but how they are challenging themselves without any relationship to maybe an individual that is blind or visually impaired or someone that is mobility impaired, but they themselves are challenging their own studio practice to enhance and intensify their skills, and then having this opportunity and this stage and this platform to really share in their passion for challenging not only themselves but then the viewer. And I'm just so happy that this opportunity was here for you guys, for all of you involved. I think that was just really exciting to be proud of. And so taking this back into my community, I think it's really important that we begin to step outside of the studio that I have kind of created and the energy that I have kind of set forth, and really start engaging and tapping into other areas of the community, other artists, So I'm really excited to be able to kind of expand that multimodal and multisensory experience through the expressive arts, and just kind of seeing where things are going to go. So, thank you.
I'll pick up a little bit on what Sarah was saying. Thinking about art, we're thinking about imagination. And so I think what's interesting in thinking about the works in this show and the artists in this show is that they're imagining an audience that has a wider range of members in it. So they're imagining, what would it be like to touch this that I'm making? And in some ways it's not a really far leap for many artists, particularly artists who work in 3D form, sculptors, because of course they're handling their materials. They take pleasure in the materials that they're handling. Most artists that I know can talk a lot about what it feels like to do this, how they put things together, why they chose the materials they did, and so on and so forth. And so, but still, it takes imagination to picture people in an art gallery who are going to be accessing that work through touch. I will say it's not documented in the show, but there are a number of blind and visually impaired artists in the show. There are 3 that I know of personally, just because I know of them personally, but there may be others. It wasn't a requirement that people sort of, indicate their disability status. But I mentioned that in passing, and but I wanted that to be available for artists who might feel excluded from a general call. But I wanted to pick up on other thing that's coming up, which is about access in general. Here, we're sort of talking, maybe because, I'm a blind person, so I'm talking about blind access, and I've written about blind access. But of course, access to the arts is multifaceted. We're trying to think about a diverse population, and what are the features that need to be in place to make art accessible. And also thinking here we're in the realm of visual arts, of fine arts, but other art venues of performing arts, of architecture, film and video. So maybe we can pick up on that. One thing that I'm always struck by, because I do a lot of work in museums, and most major museums now, you can go and you can hit on the accessibility or disability button or something, and you'll get a page, and it will detail what services and programs are available. And I've sort of been struck lately how there's this element of segregation. So there's the wheelchair symbol, and you know that if you click on that, then you're going to get information about where are the ramps and where are the accessible bathrooms and paths of travel and so on and so forth. And then if you click on the icon that has the person walking with the cane, then you'll get the, and so on and so forth. And so it feels like even in this gesture towards inclusion, there's sort of a segmentation of the population into different categories. And so I'm kind of interested in promoting ideas where you're opening up possibilities for all sorts of people without necessarily kind of putting them into a particular category. I wonder if anybody has some comments along those lines.
Oh yeah, one of the things I find about this exhibition actually overcomes that. When I've been observing people, it seems to work for everybody. It works. One thing I was interested to note is that it works beautifully for parents with children, because parents don't have to worry that their children are touching the art. You can see the stress level sort of goes down and their shoulders relax. And so that, in some ways, to me, this exhibition accomplishes so much of what you hoped for, I think, and would hope for. I like to think that the concept of universal design, when you design something for one particular group of people, you actually find there's a ripple effect, and it actually supports a lot of other people. I mean, the classic is the idea of the ramp in the pavement, that you find it maybe was developed for wheelchairs, but it works well for for mothers with children, etc. And I think that again is a side effect or effect of this particular exhibition, is how many people it works for. And within a museum, certainly one of the things that we strive for, particularly if we do tours for people within the accessibility department, is that they do manage to work for a very number of people. Quite often a tour that works for somebody with vision loss, if we're using a multi-sensory program, will also work possibly for somebody with a cognitive disability or somebody with memory loss, because you are trying to, again, this idea of using many different senses actually applies to a very large audience.
And yes, I would like to just add to that a little bit about the wheelchair access. A lot of the performing art spaces and stages in the past were not wheelchair accessible. And I know in Massachusetts, the State Architectural Access Board came up with new regulations for staging and accessibility that involved education spaces and schools. And that made a huge difference. So if we went out and did a performing arts, we would actually be able to get on stage and join with others, so that kids with and without disabilities could join. Some of the stages I went to in Boston Parks for the Arts, they actually had a wheelchair lift going up to the stage. So just that awareness, I think, is huge. I always feel so lucky to be in a space that gets it. You don't have to educate ahead of time, you already know. And this particular exhibit is just the epitome of we get it, and this is what we're embracing. And this is universal design, I believe. We can see this exhibit is. People with and without disabilities can enjoy the art in different ways. So, do you want to, Sarah?
Well, you know, Georgina, I'm just thinking of those, like, almost like these silos within the disability realm. I mean, I think that it's tricky. You know, I mean, bottom line, you know, when you're looking at different sort of ADA regulations and like a standardization of policy, procedure, those kinds of things. I mean, it's, you know, maybe within that that tab, there's a crossover or an intersection of this would be accessible for individuals in wheelchairs that are blind. I know for myself that I've recently had an exhibit in our community, and I would say half of them were all mobility impaired and in wheelchairs, and I just asked the gallery, you know, is it possible if we hang this show 20 inches lower than standard? You know, I mean, you know, that's not necessarily addressing, you know, the challenges that you're talking about, Georgina, but I think in my own way, you know, I try to do my people right, and their families, and then again, kind of thinking of youth, and that experiential, those moments for them, you know, because they're always having to look so high if they want to experience, you know, a painting or two-dimensional work. And even a pedestal could be positioned so high where they're not able to visually even access something. So, yeah, tricky subject, I think. But if anybody's going to tackle it, it'll be you.
Well, I mean, again, it comes back to the idea of imagination. You know, one of the things about tactile art is you realize that putting it on the wall is not necessarily always the best choice. That sometimes it's, you know, because to hold your hand vertically is not always the ideal way. that sometimes you want to come at it from above or you want to come at it from the side. But if you think of the way most museums and galleries are arranged, it's all about the walls, right? And yet you typically have empty space in the beginning and so in the middle, and then how do you innovate on, do you put everything on a pedestal? How high should the pedestal be? Is there a way to have the pedestal on a lift? So, because I'm a tall person, so I would like the pedestal to be high, and somebody else would like it to be low. And so forth. I mean, I think the challenge is to really, universal design is kind of a catchphrase, and I think that there are a lot of people who are not happy with that as a phrase because is it really universal? And some people are more in favor of saying something like inclusive, that there's a gesture towards inclusion. You may not be able to get everything right every time. But again, it's sort of a matter of somebody having the imagination to say, well, what if you couldn't see, or what if you couldn't hear, or what if you were in a wheelchair, or what if you were this person or that person? How would you get a satisfying, educational, aesthetic, pleasurable experience in this space? The other thing that I'll say, this is going back to what Maryan was saying about wheelchair ramps and how, auditoria in schools and stuff, they don't have a ramp, And I teach my students, you can read a building like you read a book. And you can look at anything and you say, who was this designed for? Who is supposed to inhabit this space? And when you walk into, your standard high school auditorium, you may say, okay, so there's spaces for the wheelchairs in the front row, right? They're all down in front, or maybe they're up and back, right? Those are the two places they're going to be. But when that stage has 5 steps up there, it's saying, nobody wants to look at that. And that communicates something over a lifetime, right? The same thing is true for people with all different types of impairments. When you're going into a space where no one has imagined that you would enter it, it's sending a message over and over again. And so I think what's exciting about an exhibit like this is the center said, okay, we're going to do this thing. Let's figure out all the different pieces that are going to be useful, right down to the little rubber balls. I don't know if you noticed, that are in front of the different pieces of art, which I found really innovative and useful, because it's kind of a complex space, and I don't necessarily want to be standing in front of the sign that says, in case of fire breach, there's no little ball, I'm not going to stand there, okay? And just this idea that you take a little rubber ball and you cut it in half and you glue it to the floor and then you send a message. So anyway, and you can turn this to a question.
Well, I would like to say though real quick, Georgina, to architectural design. The Envision Arts program that the space in which I currently work in, is getting ready to go under a major renovation and expansion. And one day the architects came down into that space and wanted to have a conversation with me about design. And I said, no, you are not going to talk to me. And I turned to my entire class and I said to them, you will ask them the questions. So they spent an hour with that architect and really trying to design a studio space, a safe, kind of state-of-the-art space where they can be imaginative and innovative in a safe way that is conducive to it being independent. And I think, Lindsay being here tonight, just observing her, an individual here this evening that is total blind, and just kind of watching her go through this exhibit is also, just learning so much, I think, and Ronit would probably agree to that. So yeah, let's stop having maybe total sighted people design everything, and then see where we can go from there. I don't know.
I just want to add to it that people that we're thinking about are wheelchair users and people are blind and accessibility, but we have to also look at people who have sensory abilities, and sometimes lighting is an issue. I actually, when I was performing once, I really found lighting was an issue because I didn't know where the end of the stage was. And here I am flipping around with the wheelchairs, and I'm also thinking about the other performers. Oh no, I hope our choreography wasn't too close to this space. And then I'm thinking, wow, what about, you know, other people who are like, have their fears about certain spaces? How can we design a place that's more universally accessible for them as well? What I like about this exhibit is that you have different textures. You have some artwork that's on the ground that you can feel, and so if somebody doesn't really want to use their hands to touch, they might be able to touch it with different body parts, look at it, feel it, stare at it different ways. So it's just, everyone has their own experience with the art, and what I like about this exhibit is it allows people with different abilities to experience it differently.
I also like the way that things have been thought of inclusively. I love the tactile map at the entry to the museum, to the exhibition, to orientate you within the space as a whole. Because something that's always is always a challenge is this idea of how do you orientate people to a space that the exhibition is actually in. And I think that's been done absolutely beautifully here. And the whole introduction and the various types of ways of accessing in terms of large print and braille, and I think it's been extremely well thought through.
I think the time has come to open it up to questions and comments from the audience, and I think, Annalise, do you have a mic? Okay, so Annalise will gracefully run around and so that we can make everybody's questions and comments accessible. So, anyone? Oh, she's coming.
Hello. First of all, thank you all for your work, for talking to us and maybe educating us on things that are maybe not that obvious. I find it interesting that we are addressing the way we interact with art and people can interact with art. I think it's very special because it's not something you think about when you see somebody with a disability. You try to think of how to help them and improve their quality of life, and we don't realize that maybe experiencing art can be a way to improve their quality of life rather than maybe just come up with alternatives and ways to have medicine do its thing, right? And then wait patiently for everything to be standardized. Inclusivity, universality, all that we're touching upon is very special and it's very important. And what I think is really important about the whole cause of exploring these types of art, multisensory, is that we can explore it in a medium that's pretty harmless. We're not exploring it directly in medicine, but findings can be definitely linked because we're studying sensory expressions and understanding the relation between our different senses. And it might end up being a question that may be too long to answer, and so I prefer a brief one for everybody else. But how do you see this work can impact the development of medicine in different areas? If we're thinking of sensory stimuli, if we're thinking of art, if we're thinking of impulses, we're thinking of how the brain understands that kind of stimuli and information. Maybe we can devise different ways to work with Alzheimer's patients, right? With people with Parkinson. And try to not only find inclusivity, but find ways for palliative care to be something that offers a possibility while people wait for the consequence of the births, right? Thank you for clearing me up.
I think I could speak to that. I work at group homes with people with multiple disabilities. Some of them might have Alzheimer's, some of them might be blind or have different cognitive levels. And music is very powerful. I do dance, so dance is a universal language as well as music. So the combination, we're able to touch on people that may be nonverbal, but actually I won't use the word nonverbal because they generally just communicate in different ways. I think that has a carryover to medicine, whether it's palliative care or whatever level a person may need. I think art is really important, and I think that there should be collaborative efforts increased, and that hopefully we together can do that, can promote that. Thank you.
Just wanted to add, I think the idea of the development of senses other than the visual sense is very important. And one thing I've noticed with tours that we do with people with memory loss at the museum, we use a lot of scents. And quite often when something is smelled, it produces a memory. And we might be talking about a specific artwork, let's say, that's related to food or cooking, and we maybe use the scent of cinnamon. It will relate to somebody, will relate to that, and we'll tell a story or a memory from their lives that maybe relates to cooking and to cinnamon. So I noticed that scent seems to have a very strong effect on people thinking about memories.
I'll just add that when we talk about aesthetics, a long history of aesthetics, we're primarily talking about vision and a little bit about sound with the aesthetics of music. And one of the things that's exciting about this show is that I don't think we have the same vocabulary or the same kind of deep philosophical grounding in tactile aesthetics. How do we, it's more than just the fact that we have license to touch this artwork, but what are we getting out of that? What is it doing for us, for all of us? Blind people, sighted people, whoever is touching the art. And I think that that's something that maybe is in its infancy, maybe it's started here. This is not the only work show of tactile art that's ever happened, but it's the one where we happen to be, so we'll give it credit for everything. But yay, yeah, it started here tonight. But to sort of think about, some of it's a matter of evaluation. It's like, I like this piece, I don't like that piece as much. But why? Why? Sort of answering those types of questions, can sort of elevate the experience, the sort of intellectual, philosophical, aesthetic experience for everyone. I like what the questioner just said about, that mostly when people consider disability, they're thinking of quality of life. It's kind of basic survival, right? But to think about how is art elevating quality of life, but maybe even more than that. Is art just about kind of something entertaining, diverting, passes the time? It's better than playing video games, and I think sort of when we have these discussions about opening up access to the arts for people who have been in the past excluded from art spaces, it does sort of force us to go back and think about what is the cultural value of art? And I think that's an interesting question to ask. I don't have an answer to that. I don't want to take up more time. But I think to, sort of recognize that this is not just, okay, everybody gets to touch the art. It's opening up a whole lot of other questions that I think are really, really interesting to consider. I'll shut up. Somebody else ask me.
Thank you. Well, actually, I formulated a question, but then it turns out that it actually is a wonderful springing off of what you have just said. But my simple question was, so it seemed to me that the labels in the exhibit, am I correct that there was also Braille? And so my question is, was the Braille and more or less exact translation of what the written was? Or is there, or was it different with, is there some vocabulary, some difference of vocabulary for perhaps direction for a tactile experience? And whether that was included here, or if that would be something that would be done for sighted as well as non-sighted to increase the tactile appreciation.
I can answer that question. Annalise can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe all the Braille labels that are overlaid on the print labels by the works of art say the same thing.
That's
Isn't that
correct.
right?
Yep,
Yeah.
everything's correct.
So there's no abbreviation.
Correct.
And Braille, for people who don't know, Braille is a transcription system. It's not a language, per se. So that the Braille, the groups of Braille characters correspond to the Roman alphabet, the same alphabet. So it's, sometimes people want to compare it to sign language, but sign language is a different language, so there's different vocabulary. And those labels, for the most part, the texts there were the text that the artists themselves generated. So those are isn't that right, Annalise?
It is, yes.
Yeah. So those are the same texts, or portions of the same text that the artists submitted when they submitted images of their works. So those are the words of the artists themselves, which is also an interesting feature because, you know, in many museums, what the label says is, you know, the artist's name, their dates, and the title of the work. And if there's any kind of descriptive text, it's often by a curator or some art historian or somebody else. But here you have the language of the artists themselves. And there was sort of a range of responses that the artists came up with. In some instances, they focused mainly on how the work was made. And I think that delivers information about how, you know, knowing how something is made is sometimes a good way to get a handle on what it looks like, but also what it feels like. Some of them gave a more sort of abstract philosophical answer. So they said a little bit about how it was made, but they really wanted to talk about the ideas behind the making of it. And then some had very kind of specific instructions about how to touch this particular art. So, you know, it's like you should follow the path, or you should dig your fingers in this way, or you should wrap this around your body and do this and that. So it was interesting to me to see the artists kind of given this writing prompt that then had a lot to say about both where the idea came from, the material creation of the work, but also imagining, you know, sort of giving help to the viewers, to people to interact with their work.
This discussion has really caused me to think about where I feel at the moment I'm going, which is how do you make images out of words and letters and when you do that, can you do that with Braille as well? If you take the written word whale and you stretch it and warp it so that you touch it, you can feel the fins and the tail. Can you do that with Braille? I don't know Braille well enough. That's so I just wonder, for those of you who are Braille, who write in Braille, if you write whale in Braille, can you stretch it in a way and still know from the Braille what you're touching?
I think Kim should answer that question.
So the short answer probably is no, but because Braille is made up of 6 dots, and each little character set is called a cell, and each letter fits in that cell. But my book that Annalise made reference to, called Drawing with Your Perkins Brailler, it uses Braille characters to create something on the page that, I call it sort of Braille paint by the numbers, because what you do is you follow spacing directions that I've given with a Perkins Brailler, and you write certain characters on certain lines in certain places, and what the finished product is a visual picture that a blind person can show a sighted person and say, this is a picture of an elephant. And you should be able to recognize that as a picture of an elephant. That's the satisfaction that the blind person gets by saying, I made this, and you recognized what I was making. It's not one of those experiences where you know, a child shows you a drawing and you all have done it. You go, what a nice drawing. Oh, that's so nice. And you have no clue what it was. So part of my whole purpose was to make it so that it was clearly recognizable as something, but it uses Braille to draw the picture. So the book is on display here in the building, I think on the 3rd floor. And there's about 36 different pictures, and they're all in the book, so you can flip through and actually see the train, you can see the truck, you can see the elephant, the angel, all kinds of different things that you can make using Braille characters. So that's the closest thing to what you were talking about.
I think we have enough time for a couple more. I saw Cindy there, and I blew her off because Michael was closer to me.
Thank you so much for this panel discussion. So interesting. I had a question. I was really interested in what you were saying, Georgina, about an aesthetics of touch. And that made me think about how touch is so intimately intertwined with our emotions. And so our descriptors for our emotions are often derived from tactile perception. So someone feeling hard or soft or sharp, or even warmth or coldness. I think there have been psychology studies where if someone is holding a warm cup of liquid, that actually produces warm feelings towards people or a situation as well. And it's something I haven't really thought that much about in terms of an aesthetics of touch. And you mentioned that there hasn't been much done on that, but I'm curious if, can you direct us towards anything that has been written on the subject or discussed in this area, because I think it's a really rich area. The same way that smell. I mean, I think in terms of neuroscience, these senses that are actually much more that go to the emotional centers and as a first relay, versus sight actually has to go through other relays as well to get through to the emotional centers. So so I'm just curious if there are any books or things written on the aesthetics of touch that you could direct us to.
Was that Roz? No, where's Roz? She has a book coming out, which will, she's one of the artists. She has three pieces in the show. Do you want to, the mic so you can say?
Oh, sorry.
I've mostly written it, and it's now in review and will be published in December by Bloomsbury, called By the Light of the Body, the Somatic Senses in the Visual Arts. And it comes out of about 10 years of working exclusively with touch, aesthetic touch, and making sculptures that people could touch, and gathering comments from people, interviews, sort of a deep exploration of how this works, how touch works in the aesthetic context. So just to say that it's coming, and I'll make sure that Annalise has the information about it. But there's a chapter on how I came to it, sort of learning the language of touch, a chapter on the hand, one on time, memory, emotion, imagining, chapter on museums, on a sense of connection, sort of many ways in which I've come across this, sort of the arenas in which I've explored it. It's written primarily for, I think, anyone who's interested, but especially for artists, because there is nothing that I've found. Otherwise, I mean, Georgina's written beautifully, and there's a lot of information in there, but in terms of an artist's process, there's a lot of information about that.
Anyways, I don't know if any of you had any other comments or to add to that question. Sure. Amy, did you have a question?
I actually had some comments about tactility. I'm one of the filmmakers in the exhibit, and I think that if you're a filmmaker, you just really, the tactile nature of your work is really important. And the work I've done in the past has been mostly craft-oriented too, and that's another one of those big things. What's fine art versus craft, or even fine craft? And my understanding is that craft is you're making objects that are meant to be used in your day-to-day life, and tactility, of course, touching and using your piece is part of that, and touching is mundane and can sometimes even be base. You don't touch the art on the walls in museums and galleries. You don't touch important people. And when I was thinking about, because you don't want the peasants contaminating important people. And I thought that tactility was one of those things that sort of, in addition to being used on a daily basis, was one of those things that seemed to be one of those artificial divisions between art and craft. When I was making my piece, I was thinking, what am I going to do, given that I like things that are touched? There's then this dichotomy then of trying to make a piece that hangs on a wall. What is that? What is that for me? And I've noticed, I've noticed there are now quilters, right? There's quilters who make things that lie on the bed, and then there are quilters who make things that are meant to hang on the wall. And I see in their work too, sometimes you're not really supposed to touch. These are just sort of observations, and this panel has been really just interesting to me, and thinking about what, if I were to make more panels, what would I do? What would I do? Is it just a combination of pretty colors then, or is it are there features that felt is really lends itself well to that provide a different experience? So whether that's almost obviously touch, but perhaps other things. So that's
I'll just comment on part of your comments, maybe the first paragraph. Well, what sparked my memory was remembering, I mean, this whole idea of the introduction, you know, the nobody gets to touch the art thing, which is a relatively recent occurrence, that before there were museums, official public institutions, art, you know, was owned by wealthy people, by royalty, by institutions of religion. That's where art existed. But there were people who had private collections of art and artifacts, and they would invite their friends who were also rich people to come over and, you know, look at their collections, but also to handle their collections. And there are a number of books about the sort of history of touch in museums, which is maybe different from tactile aesthetics, but the sort of history about when it stopped being allowed. And there are, for instance, there's a woman in the UK named Fiona Candlin, has a book, I can't remember the title. There's also a book by Constance Classen, who's Canadian. Anyway, you can find these books, and they have bits and pieces of information that might be useful to you. But in some of them, they quote first-hand accounts of people, you know, in their journals or their letters, who would go and they would handle artworks in somebody else's collections. And they're quite beautiful, and they're quite detailed in their tactile appreciation. So it's not just, oh, I'm handling this ancient art object and it's so exciting. They have all this kind of detailed information about what that felt like. And it's really, really interesting. When museums opened up as public institutions, suddenly you have the public, right? And the public's coming in here, and they don't have, and there's language that in the founding museums, they talk about this. The public doesn't have this degree of refinement. I mean, this is all about class, ultimately. That they wouldn't know how to touch things correctly. And that's when you put it all behind glass. It's like, you know, if you can look at it, but keep your hands in your pockets. So I recommend sort of seeking out some of those texts, mainly for these accounts of people who, in the past, who did handle artworks and artifacts and things. And the other thing I'll say about what you're saying is that I think you're really onto something about the idea of craft versus art. And does an object achieve status as an art object because you can't touch it, versus if you make it to be handled and be used every day, then it's craft. And I think that's an interesting thing to maybe examine a little bit.
Excellent. Unfortunately, I don't think we have enough time for any more questions this evening, but the ladies are all here and available the remainder of the evening to approach them directly and chat with them. I hope you'll all join me in thanking our panelists for joining us. We're very grateful to let us take the reins for the last hour, so we appreciate that. And so just a reminder, you're more than welcome to head up to the third floor, so you can actually take either of these staircases here up to the third floor to check out the humanities exhibit, or also if you exit the theater from my left-hand side, your right-hand side, there's an elevator that will take you right up to the third floor, just number 3, and you can check it out from there as well. And we have a bit of more time, so feel free to grab more food, more drinks, and chat with our panelists individually if you'd like. Thank you very much.